Welcome to Cinematic History for Sleep. This channel is dedicated to calm, slow, and immersive historical journeys, created to help you relax, unwind, and gently fall asleep. Here, history is not loud, it is not rushed, and it is not dramatic. Tonight's journey explores how people slept in the Middle Ages. Not through fear or shock, but through quiet observation, daily habits, and gentle understanding. If you are new here, you are very welcome. And if these videos help you rest, feel free to subscribe and return whenever you need calm. If you feel like it, you are welcome to share in the comments where you are listening from and what time of night it is for you. You can listen with your eyes closed, or simply let the images drift by. Wherever you are watching from, and however your day has been, you are safe here. Let us begin. As the sun began to lower, the medieval world did not rush. There were no switches to flip, no sudden darkness. Evening arrived gradually, like a quiet agreement between light and shadow. Fields emptied slowly. Tools were set down. Voices softened. The rhythm of the day loosened its grip. In villages and small towns, people noticed the light changing, not with urgency, but with familiarity. They had lived their entire lives by the movement of the sun. When the light faded, the body understood that it was time to slow. Smoke rose gently from chimneys, thin and unhurried. Doors were closed, not to shut the world out, but to gather warmth inside. Inside stone and timber homes, shadows lengthened along the walls. The air grew quieter. This was not a moment of fear. It was a moment of transition. Night was not an interruption of life. It was a return to stillness. The body softened. The mind followed. In a world without clocks, evening was felt, not measured. And as darkness settled gently over the land, people did what they had always done. They prepared calmly for rest. In the Middle Ages, the idea of a bed was very different from what we know today. A bed was not a private retreat, not a carefully chosen piece of furniture, and not something everyone owned. For many people, a bed simply meant a place where the body could pause. In wealthier homes, beds were wooden frames, often raised slightly from the ground. They were filled with straw, dried leaves, wool, or feathers, depending on what the household could afford. These materials shifted during the night, settling unevenly, reshaping themselves around the sleeper. Comfort was not precise or predictable, but it was familiar. For those with fewer resources, a bed might not exist at all. Sleep happened on the floor, on benches near the hearth, or on simple pallets laid out at night and gathered again by morning. These arrangements were not seen as uncomfortable or temporary. They were simply part of daily life. What mattered was not softness, but warmth. Cold was a constant presence in medieval life. Stone walls held the chill. Windows were small. Firewood was precious. Because of this, beds were often placed close to the hearth or near other bodies, where shared heat could last through the night. The concept of personal space did not shape sleep in the way it does today. A bed was rarely used by only one person. Couples shared beds. Children joined their parents. Servants slept nearby. The bed was not a symbol of individuality, but of togetherness. Even among the upper classes, beds served more than one purpose. They were places of rest, conversation, prayer, and sometimes work. Illness was treated in bed. Important conversations took place there. Births and deaths often happened on the same surface where people slept night after night. In this world, the bed was not sacred because it was private. It was sacred because it supported life. Clean sheets were rare. Mattresses were aired when possible, but perfection was not expected. Sleep did not require ideal conditions. It required only that the body felt safe enough to let go. The medieval understanding of rest was practical. A bed did not promise comfort. It offered pause. And that pause, repeated night after night, was enough. As the body settled onto straw or wool, as weight pressed into wood or earth, sleep arrived not as an escape, but as a continuation of the day's rhythm. In the Middle Ages, a bed was not designed to isolate the sleeper from the world. It kept them within it. Rest was shared. Rest was simple. Rest was accepted as it came. And in that acceptance, sleep found its place. In the Middle Ages, sleep was rarely a solitary experience. The idea of sleeping alone in a separate room behind a closed door belonged to a much later time. For medieval people, closeness during sleep was normal, expected, and practical. Families shared sleeping spaces. Parents slept beside their children. Siblings rested together. In many households, servants slept in the same room as their employers, or just a few steps away. This closeness was not seen as intrusive. It was simply how life was arranged. Warmth played an important role. Bodies shared heat in a world where cold nights were common and fire could not be kept burning until morning. Sleeping close helped preserve warmth long after the embers faded. But closeness offered more than physical comfort. It created a sense of safety. The night could be unpredictable. Sounds traveled easily through darkness. Wind pressed against walls. Animals moved outside. In such a world, sleeping near others meant reassurance. A quiet breath nearby, the subtle movement of another body reminded sleepers that they were not alone. Children, especially, found comfort in shared sleep. The presence of adults brought calm. Fear did not need to be named or discussed. It dissolved naturally in company. Even among adults, shared sleep carried no sense of awkwardness. Privacy was not an expectation. Life unfolded openly. Waking, working, resting, and sleeping often happened in the same spaces. There were unspoken rules. People learned how to rest without disturbing others. Movements were small. Voices were low. Night encouraged restraint. This shared rhythm created a kind of quiet harmony. In larger homes, beds were sometimes shared by people who were not related. Travelers, apprentices, or guests might be offered a place beside someone already sleeping. This was not unusual. It was considered practical hospitality. To modern eyes, this closeness might seem uncomfortable. But medieval people did not measure rest by distance. They measured it by familiarity. To sleep close was to belong. There was also a deeper understanding beneath this practice. Life was uncertain. Illness and loss were familiar. Sleeping near others acknowledged this fragility, not with fear, but with presence. In shared sleep, the night felt held. Breathing synchronized. Movements slowed together. The boundaries between one body and another softened. Sleep did not separate people from their community. It returned them to it. And as the night deepened, as conversation faded and stillness settled, shared rest became quiet, wordless, and complete. In the Middle Ages, to sleep close was not a compromise. It was comfort. It was security. It was simply how rest was understood. In the Middle Ages, sleep did not begin with undressing. For most people, clothing stayed on, not because of discomfort, but because of necessity. Nights were cold. Stone walls held the chill. Fire faded quickly. Warmth had to be kept, not wasted. Simple garments were worn to bed. Linen shirts, woolen layers, sometimes cloaks, pulled close to the body. Clothing was familiar. It carried the shape of the day. To sleep in these garments felt natural. There was no sharp division between waking and resting. The body moved from work to rest without interruption. Sleep came wrapped in fabric, not separated from it. Blankets were few. Heavy wool was shared. Layers mattered. Warmth was created by what was worn, not by what was removed. Sleeping positions were simple. Many rested on their sides, drawing knees inward, holding heat close. Others lay flat, arms folded gently, breath slow. Movement was minimal. Stillness preserved warmth. Pillows, when they existed, were small. Sometimes nothing more than folded cloth or bundled straw. The goal was not comfort, but balance. To stay warm without strain. To rest without excess. Even posture carried meaning. Sleeping upright was not unusual, especially near the hearth. It eased breathing. It kept the body alert even in rest. The body learned to sleep lightly, to wake easily. In this world, sleep was not an escape. It was a pause held gently by habit. Clothing held warmth. Position held balance. Stillness held the night. And as hours passed without clocks, without counting, the body rested exactly as it needed to. Not more, not less. Just enough. In the Middle Ages, warmth was never taken for granted. Cold was patient. It waited in stone walls, in earthen floors, in the dark corners of the night. Fire gave heat, but only for a while. As embers dimmed, the night grew heavier. Warmth had to be shared. Bodies were brought close, not out of affection, but out of understanding. Heat traveled slowly from one body to another. It gathered beneath wool, beneath linen, beneath breath. Shared blankets were common. Heavy wool covered more than one sleeper. Edges were tucked carefully. Gaps were avoided. Every small opening meant lost warmth. Children slept between adults. The smallest bodies were protected by the largest. This was not arranged. It was instinct. Sometimes animals were brought inside. Dogs curled near feet. Cats settled close to the hearth. Their presence added warmth and quiet movement. They were part of the household, even at night. To modern eyes, this closeness might appear crowded, but for medieval people, it felt steady. The warmth of others signaled safety. Breathing nearby meant life continued through the night. Cold made no distinction between rich and poor. Everyone understood its weight. Sharing warmth was not a choice. It was survival, softened by habit. As the night deepened, movement slowed. Bodies settled. Heat was held. The room grew quiet. In this shared stillness, sleep arrived gently. Not alone. Never alone. In the medieval world, privacy was not an expectation. It was not a right, and it was not something most people imagined needing. Life unfolded in shared spaces. Work, conversation, meals, rest, and sleep all happened within the same rooms, often within a few steps of one another. Walls separated families from the outside world, but rarely separated individuals from each other. This way of living shaped how people understood rest. Sleeping was not considered a private act. It was a visible, communal rhythm of daily life. Just as people worked side by side during the day, they rested near one another at night. Rooms were few. Doors were open or did not exist at all. Curtains, when used, provided minimal separation and were more symbolic than functional. They offered a sense of order, not isolation. In such an environment, people developed quiet agreements. They learned how to be present without intruding. Movement slowed naturally at night. Voices softened. The body adapted to shared stillness. Privacy, as we understand it today, is closely tied to control. Control over space, sound, light, and time. In the Middle Ages, control was limited. People did not expect silence. They did not expect darkness to be complete. They did not expect to be alone with their thoughts. Instead, they expected familiarity. To rest among others meant accepting their presence without tension. A shifting body, a cough, or quiet breathing did not disturb sleep. It blended into it. This closeness shaped emotional boundaries as well. Feelings were not carefully hidden behind doors. Life's most intimate moments, illness, childbirth, grief, and death, occurred in shared spaces. Sleep existed within that same openness. For medieval people, separation did not equal comfort. Distance did not mean peace. Peace came from knowing one's place within the household and community. There was also a practical understanding beneath this acceptance. Nighttime brought vulnerability. Illness could worsen. Fires could fail. Unexpected sounds could signal danger. Being together meant awareness. Someone would wake if something changed. Someone would respond. Privacy, as we imagine it now, might have felt unsafe. The medieval mind did not seek solitude at night. It sought reassurance. Over time, this shared environment shaped a different relationship with the self. Thoughts were not isolated. Worries were held quietly, but not alone. Sleep was less about retreating inward and more about remaining connected while resting. This does not mean medieval people lacked inner lives. They dreamed, they reflected, they prayed. But they did these things within a world that did not demand separation. Rest did not require walls between bodies. It required trust. Trust in routine. Trust in habit. Trust in the presence of others. In the Middle Ages, privacy was not missing. It was simply not expected. And sleep, shaped by that understanding, unfolded naturally, shared, unguarded, and quietly complete. In the Middle Ages, sleep was not treated as a luxury. It was not optimized, measured, or improved. It was not something to be earned or perfected. Sleep simply followed the day. People did not plan for rest in advance. They did not calculate hours or track quality. They listened instead to the body, to the fading light, and to the slowing rhythm of the world around them. When work ended, rest began. There were no strict bedtimes, no fixed schedules, no expectation that sleep should last a certain number of hours. Some nights were long, others were short. This variability was accepted. Sleep adapted to the seasons. In winter, nights stretched wider, offering more hours of darkness and rest. In summer, sleep arrived later and left earlier, shaped by long days and early light. The body adjusted naturally. There was no sense of failure in waking during the night. Interrupted sleep was common. People stirred, shifted, prayed, or spoke quietly before resting again. This was not considered a problem. It was simply part of the night. Sleep did not need to be continuous to be meaningful. In this world, rest existed in layers. Short periods of deep sleep blended with lighter moments of awareness. The boundary between sleeping and waking was gentle, not strict. Because sleep was not treated as a performance, it carried little pressure. There was no anxiety about falling asleep quickly. no frustration about waking too early. The body rested when it could, and that was enough. Fatigue was understood as a natural consequence of life, not as a flaw. Hard work led to deep rest. Quiet days led to lighter sleep. Both were normal. Even illness did not always change this relationship. When someone was sick, rest came in small portions, interrupted and imperfect. This, too, was accepted. Sleep did not promise restoration. It offered relief. The medieval understanding of rest was deeply practical. It asked only what the body required in that moment. No more, no less. This acceptance created a calm relationship with sleep. There was no chasing it, no forcing it. When the body was ready, it rested. When it was not, it waited quietly. In this way, sleep became woven into daily life rather than set apart from it. It belonged to the same rhythm as work, meals, and conversation. Nothing about it was dramatic, and because sleep was not elevated into something rare or precious, it did not carry fear. People did not worry about losing it. They trusted it would return. Night after night, rest arrived as part of the world's natural movement, as reliable as dusk, as familiar as dawn. In the Middle Ages, sleep was not a reward. It was not a solution. It was not a luxury. It was simply what came next. Silence in the medieval world did not mean absence. It did not mean nothingness, and it did not mean stillness in the way we understand it today. Silence had shape. It had weight. It had texture. It was something people lived inside, rather than something they tried to eliminate. At night, when the visible world softened and faded, sound became the primary way of understanding space. People did not expect complete quiet. They expected continuity. The medieval night was never empty. Even in its calmest moments, it carried low, familiar sounds, subtle signals that life was still present, still moving, still breathing. What we call silence now would have felt unnatural then. Modern silence is often engineered. It is sealed behind walls, windows, insulation, and technology. It is something controlled, curated, and sometimes enforced. Medieval silence was different. It was organic. It allowed sound to exist without demanding attention. In a small village or town, the night softened the sharpness of the day. Voices faded. Tools were set aside. Footsteps slowed and then stopped. But silence did not arrive all at once. It settled gradually, like dust. The crackle of a dying fire lingered in the hearth. Wood shifted as it cooled. Stone released the warmth it had gathered during the day. Somewhere nearby, a body turned slightly in sleep. These sounds did not interrupt rest. They shaped it. People learned to recognize patterns within this quiet. The familiar creak of a beam meant nothing was wrong. The distant bark of a dog confirmed that the night was normal. The whisper of wind against shutters told them the weather was changing, gently. Sound was not a disturbance. It was information. Silence, then, was not the absence of sound, but the absence of urgency. There was no pressure to interpret every noise as a threat. Most sounds belonged where they were. This understanding created a different relationship with attention. The mind did not jump quickly. It rested. Listening became passive, almost unconscious. As people lay down to sleep, they did not attempt to shut the world out. They allowed it to remain present at a low volume. Silence wrapped around sound rather than erasing it. In this way, silence acted as a container. It held the night together. The body learned that quiet did not mean vulnerability. It meant stability. Darkness and silence worked together. Without visual distraction, the ear took over, not to search, but to settle. A steady environment allowed the mind to drift without fear. This is why medieval silence rarely caused anxiety. It was familiar from childhood. People grew up within it. From the earliest years, they learned that silence came with safety, with shared spaces, shared warmth, shared breath. Children fell asleep hearing the same sounds night after night. These sounds became markers of reassurance. When silence changed, it was noticed, but not immediately feared. An unfamiliar sound did not demand panic. It demanded attention, gently. There was time to listen, time to assess. This slow response shaped emotional regulation. The nervous system did not spike quickly. It trusted continuity. Silence also carried social meaning. Night was not a time for performance or explanation. Words were unnecessary. In shared sleeping spaces, people rested together without speaking. Silence was a shared agreement. No one needed to announce that they were tired. No one needed to justify rest. The absence of speech did not signal disconnection. It signaled permission. Silence told the body it could release effort. In the medieval imagination, silence was not empty because the world itself was alive. The environment breathed alongside the sleeper. Trees moved. Animals shifted. Weather changed slowly. Human life was not separate from this movement. It was embedded within it. To sleep inside this silence was to accept belonging. There was also a spiritual layer to this quiet. Silence was often associated with humility and reverence. It was not feared. In religious contexts, silence allowed space for prayer, but not constant prayer. It allowed for presence without demand. At night, silence became a form of trust. Trust that the world would hold itself together until morning. Trust that the same sounds would return. Trust that nothing needed immediate control. This trust shaped sleep deeply. The mind did not search for perfect quiet. It adapted to gentle irregularity. A shifting sound did not break sleep. It blended into it. Over time, silence became less something one noticed and more something one lived inside. The night did not remove sound. It softened it. It lowered the volume of the world without turning it off. In that softened space, the body rested more fully. There was no expectation that silence should be complete. No frustration when a sound appeared. Everything belonged. In the Middle Ages, silence was not a void waiting to be filled. It was a presence that allowed rest. And within that presence, sleep arrived, not suddenly, not forcefully, but as a gentle continuation of the quiet that already existed. When night settled over the medieval world, sound did not disappear. It changed. Daytime sounds were sharp and purposeful. Tools struck wood and stone. Voices carried across open spaces. Footsteps moved with direction and intent. At night, sound softened. It lost urgency. What remained were familiar signals, quiet confirmations that the world was still present, still ordered, still alive. For medieval people, these sounds were not interruptions to sleep. They were part of it. One of the most common nighttime sounds was the house itself. Wood breathed as it cooled. Beams shifted slightly under their own weight. Floors released quiet creaks where warmth had settled during the day. These sounds were known. They carried no meaning beyond their repetition. A creak did not suggest danger. It suggested structure. Stone walls responded differently. They held silence more deeply, but even stone was not entirely still. It released warmth slowly, almost imperceptibly, changing the acoustics of a room as the night deepened. Near the hearth, the fire spoke its final language. Soft clicks. A faint crackle. The occasional collapse of a glowing ember. This sound marked time more gently than any clock. As long as the hearth whispered, the house felt awake enough to protect itself. Outside, the village continued its quiet conversation. Dogs barked occasionally, not loudly, not constantly. Their voices carried distance rather than alarm. A single bark, followed by silence, meant recognition, not threat. It told listeners that something had passed and been judged unimportant. Livestock shifted in their enclosures. A horse stamped once. A cow exhaled heavily. Chickens rustled as they resettled. These sounds formed a background rhythm, steady and unremarkable. Wind played a subtle role in the night's soundscape. It moved through trees and grasses, brushing surfaces rather than striking them. It pressed against shutters. It slipped through small openings. People learned to recognize its moods. A steady wind was comforting. A sudden gust drew mild attention, not fear. Rain, when it came, was welcomed as sound. It tapped against roofs and earth. It softened everything it touched. Rain at night meant continuity. It meant the world was doing what it always did. Inside shared sleeping spaces, human sounds blended into this environment. Breathing was audible, but not disruptive. A cough did not startle. A sigh did not demand response. These were signs of life continuing quietly. Someone turning in their sleep did not break rest. It confirmed it. Children murmured. Adults shifted. Sleep moved through the room in waves rather than in isolation. These sounds created reassurance. The medieval ear was trained differently from the modern one. It did not seek silence. It sought familiarity. Unfamiliar silence could feel unsettling. A complete absence of sound might suggest absence of life, absence of movement. But familiar sounds, even irregular ones, signaled normalcy. Sound was not categorized as noise or disturbance. It was simply part of the environment. People did not fight against it. They rested within it. This acceptance shaped how sleep functioned. The mind did not stay alert, waiting for disruption. It learned which sounds mattered and which did not. Most did not. Over time, familiar sounds faded into the background of awareness. They were heard without being listened to. This allowed deeper rest. The body learned that sound did not require reaction. It required only recognition. In this way, night sounds acted like a gentle boundary. They kept sleepers connected to their surroundings without pulling them fully awake. The night spoke softly, and people understood its language. When something truly unusual occurred, it stood out naturally. A sound that did not belong was noticed because it broke pattern, not because everything else was silent. This reduced anxiety. There was no constant scanning of the environment. There was trust. Trust in repetition. Trust in rhythm. Trust in the familiar voice of the night. Modern listeners might imagine medieval nights as restless or noisy, but for those who lived within them, they were predictable. Predictability created calm. Sound, in this context, was not stimulation. It was grounding. As sleep deepened, these familiar sounds continued, unnoticed but present. They carried the sleeper gently from one stage of rest to another. The night did not need to be quiet to be peaceful. It needed only to be known. And in the Middle Ages, night sounds were known intimately, not studied, not analyzed, but lived with. They were the quiet companions of rest. In the medieval world, darkness was not something to escape. It was not an enemy. It was not a failure of light. Darkness was a condition of life. People did not expect the night to be illuminated. They did not anticipate visibility beyond what a candle or fire could briefly offer. When the sun set, the world changed its form, and this change was accepted. Darkness arrived every evening without exception. It shaped how people moved, how they listened, and how they rested. From childhood, medieval people learned to live without seeing clearly. They learned to recognize space through memory rather than sight. A doorway did not need to be visible to be known. A room did not need light to be navigated. The body remembered. Hands reached out instinctively. Feet moved carefully, guided by familiarity. Darkness did not disorient. It confirmed that the day had ended. Because darkness was expected, it did not provoke fear. Fear often arises when something feels sudden or unfamiliar. For medieval people, darkness was neither. It was predictable. It followed the same rhythm as the sun. There was also an understanding that darkness brought limits, and those limits were respected. Night was not the time for unnecessary movement. Tasks ended when light faded. This acceptance reduced conflict with the night. People did not try to push through darkness. They adjusted to it. Candlelight existed, but it was used carefully. Light was precious. It was not scattered casually. A single flame created a small island of visibility, surrounded by shadow. People learned to live within that boundary. The edges of vision faded gently into darkness, and that was normal. Darkness did not need to be filled. In modern life, darkness is often associated with danger or anxiety because it interrupts control. It hides what we expect to see. For medieval people, darkness was not hiding anything new. It simply softened what was already known. A familiar room in the dark was still familiar. Its contents did not change. Because of this, darkness did not demand constant alertness. It encouraged stillness. There was also a practical awareness beneath this calm. Moving in darkness carried risk. Trips and falls were possible. So movement slowed. Slowness became a form of safety. Instead of rushing, people waited. Instead of searching, they rested. This relationship with darkness trained patience. The body learned to pause rather than react. Over time, darkness became associated with rest rather than threat. Sleep arrived more easily when the eyes had nothing to hold on to. Without visual stimulation, the mind softened. Thoughts drifted rather than focused. Darkness removed distraction. There was also a cultural layer to this acceptance. In religious thought, darkness was not inherently evil, it was part of creation. Night was believed to have its own order, its own protection. God was thought to watch over both day and night. This belief reduced fear. People did not feel abandoned when the light faded. They felt held by a larger rhythm. Even those who were not deeply religious absorbed this understanding through habit. The night was not chaotic. It followed rules. Stars moved predictably. The moon returned in cycles. Darkness did not erase time. It marked it. In villages and towns, people slept knowing that others slept too. Darkness was shared. This collective experience softened anxiety. No one faced the night alone. Children learned early that darkness meant closeness. Families gathered. Voices lowered. Bodies rested nearby. Darkness became associated with safety and warmth rather than isolation. Even the unknown carried less weight. Strange sounds were filtered through familiarity rather than imagination. Without constant visual input, the mind did not jump quickly to conclusions. It waited. This waiting shaped emotional resilience. Fear requires imagination to expand unchecked. Darkness, when familiar, limited that expansion. The night did not invite fear. It invited surrender. To close one's eyes in darkness was not to lose awareness. It was to shift into another mode of being, a quieter one. In this way, medieval people lived comfortably within darkness. They did not romanticize it. They did not resist it. They accepted it as a necessary half of existence. Darkness was not empty. It was full of rest. As sleep deepened, the absence of light allowed the body to release effort. Muscles softened. Breath slowed. The world no longer needed to be watched. In the Middle Ages, darkness was not feared because it was known. It arrived gently. It stayed quietly. and it left on its own. And within it, sleep came naturally, not as an escape from the world, but as a continuation of its rhythm. In the medieval world, listening was not a passive act. It was a form of awareness shaped by trust rather than alertness. At night, when sight withdrew, hearing became the primary sense through which people understood their surroundings. But this listening was not sharp or searching. It was gentle. It was relaxed. It was rooted in familiarity. People did not listen for danger. They listened for continuity. A sound that repeated itself night after night did not demand attention. It offered reassurance. Listening became a way of confirming that the world was behaving as expected. The medieval ear learned patterns early in life. From childhood, people grew accustomed to the sounds that belonged to night, the slow breathing of others, the distant movement of animals, the soft conversation of the house itself. These sounds formed an acoustic landscape that did not change suddenly. Stability created calm. Unlike modern listening, which often seeks meaning, medieval listening sought presence. It was not analytical. It did not ask questions. It rested. When someone lay down to sleep, they did not attempt to block sound. They allowed it to exist at the edges of awareness. Sound was not something to be managed. It was something to be trusted. This trust shaped the body's response. The nervous system did not tense at every noise. It learned which sounds belonged and which did not. Most belonged. A cough from across the room did not interrupt rest. It signaled that life continued normally. A shift of weight nearby did not cause concern. It blended into the rhythm of shared sleep. Listening, in this context, was grounding. It anchored the sleeper in the present moment without requiring effort. Silence, when combined with familiar sound, created a sense of enclosure. The room felt held together by breath and movement. This experience was deeply regulating. In modern life, listening often comes with expectation. We listen for notifications, alarms, changes, interruptions. The medieval ear was not trained this way. Night listening did not anticipate demands. It simply received. This receptive quality allowed the mind to slow. Instead of scanning, the listener softened. Instead of preparing to respond, the body rested. Listening became almost meditative. There was also a social dimension to this comfort. In shared sleeping spaces, listening connected individuals without words. Breathing synchronized unconsciously. Movements adjusted to one another. This created a sense of belonging that extended into rest. To hear another person nearby was to know that one was not alone. This knowledge did not need to be spoken. It was felt. Listening also provided orientation within darkness. Without sight, sound mapped space. The position of a voice, the direction of a breath, the location of a fire. These details allowed people to locate themselves without moving. This reduced anxiety. The body did not need to test the environment. It already understood it. Even outside sounds contributed to this comfort. A dog barking in the distance confirmed the boundary of the village. Livestock shifting signaled normal nighttime behavior. These sounds did not intrude. They reinforced the structure of the world. Listening did not draw people outward. It allowed them to settle inward while remaining connected. In this way, sound acted as a bridge between wakefulness and sleep. As awareness softened, sounds faded naturally into the background. They were heard without effort. This gradual fading helped guide the mind into rest. There was no sudden silence to disrupt the transition. No sharp boundary between waking and sleeping. Listening eased the passage. The medieval experience of night was not sensory deprivation. It was sensory balance. Hearing compensated gently for the absence of light, creating a stable environment for rest. Over time, this way of listening shaped emotional resilience. The body learned that not every sound required action. It learned patience. It learned trust. This trust allowed deeper sleep. The mind did not need to remain vigilant. It could release control. Listening became a form of surrender, not to danger, but to familiarity. Even dreams were shaped by this acoustic environment. Sounds filtered into sleep softly, without breaking it. A distant noise might weave itself into a dream rather than waking the sleeper. Sleep and listening coexisted. In this world, comfort did not come from silence alone. It came from the right kind of sound, familiar, predictable, unthreatening. The medieval night was not quiet because nothing happened. It was quiet because everything happened gently. Listening held this gentleness. As the night deepened, awareness narrowed. Sounds blurred together. The body rested within this soft field of hearing, supported rather than disturbed. In the Middle Ages, listening was not effortful. It was instinctive. It was not something one did. It was something one allowed. And within that allowance, sleep found its way. Listening did not keep people awake. It guided them toward rest. It reminded them that the world continued quietly, reliably, without their attention. And knowing this, the body let go. Even in the most familiar nights, there were moments when the darkness responded. A sound that did not follow the usual pattern. A pause where something shifted. A movement that stood out gently against the known rhythm. In the medieval world, these moments were noticed, but they were not met with panic. The night, after all, was not silent. It was expressive. When the night spoke back, it did so quietly. A branch brushing against a wall. A shutter moving in the wind. Footsteps in the distance that slowed and then stopped. These sounds did not immediately suggest danger. They invited listening. Medieval people were accustomed to distinguishing between change and threat. Not every unfamiliar sound meant harm. Most meant adjustment. Wind could change direction. Animals could move closer to warmth. Wood could respond to temperature. The body learned to wait before reacting. This waiting was not passive. It was attentive without urgency. When an unusual sound appeared, people did not rise instantly. They listened first. The sound was allowed to continue or fade. If it resolved itself, it was forgotten. If it repeated, it gained meaning slowly. This process reduced fear. Fear thrives on immediacy and uncertainty. The medieval response allowed time. Time softened interpretation. A sound that returned to silence was not pursued. A sound that settled into rhythm became familiar. Only sounds that disrupted order consistently required action, and those were rare. Because of this, the night was not a place of constant alertness. It was a place of selective awareness. People trusted that truly dangerous sounds would make themselves known clearly. They did not assume threat at the first signal. This trust shaped emotional stability. The mind did not leap ahead. It stayed present. Nighttime awareness was grounded rather than reactive. Even fear itself was understood differently. Fear was not something to suppress. It was something to acknowledge briefly and then release if unnecessary. A sound might cause a moment of stillness. Breathing paused. The body listened. If nothing followed, calm returned naturally. This cycle repeated often enough that it became familiar. Children learned this behavior by example. They watched adults respond calmly to the night. No one rushed. No one raised their voice. The night taught patience. There was also an understanding that not everything could be controlled. The night belonged partly to nature. Animals moved. Weather shifted. The environment expressed itself. This expression was not personal. It did not target the sleeper. Recognizing this reduced fear. A sound was simply a sound, not a message. This interpretation allowed the body to remain relaxed. Modern minds often fill silence with imagined scenarios. Medieval minds did not carry this burden. They lived closer to the sources of sound. They understood them intimately. Because of this familiarity, imagination had less space to grow unchecked. Even when something truly unfamiliar occurred, the response remained measured. Someone might quietly alert another. A candle might be lit briefly. Voices remained low. There was no rush to dramatize. Nighttime communication was minimal by design. The goal was to restore quiet, not escalate attention. This approach protected sleep. Sleep was not sacrificed at the first disturbance. It was guarded carefully. Once a sound was resolved, rest returned. The body did not cling to alertness longer than necessary. This ability to return to rest quickly is something modern life has largely lost. In the medieval night, wakefulness was temporary. It did not linger. The mind did not replay sounds repeatedly. It trusted resolution. This trust extended beyond sound. The night itself was trusted to pass. Darkness was not permanent. It moved toward dawn. This larger understanding softened individual moments of uncertainty. A sound in the night was not the whole story. It was a brief event within a larger rhythm. Understanding this prevented fixation. Sleep resumed. The body settled again into stillness. The night did not demand explanation. It did not require control. It simply continued. In this way, even when the night spoke back, it did not disrupt rest. It became part of the ongoing conversation between the sleeper and the world, a conversation conducted quietly, patiently, without fear. As hours passed, unusual sounds either integrated into familiarity or disappeared entirely. Nothing lingered, and because nothing lingered, sleep deepened. In the Middle Ages, the night did not test endurance. It tested trust. And that trust was learned through repetition, through experience, through calm response. The night spoke. People listened, and then they rested again. As the night deepened, darkness was no longer something to notice. It became something to rest within. In the medieval world, darkness did not press in from the outside. It settled gently, evenly, filling space without urgency. Once the eyes adjusted, there was nothing left to search for. The world simplified. Shapes softened. Edges disappeared. What remained was presence. People did not try to overcome the dark. They did not fight it. They allowed it to exist fully. This acceptance changed the experience of rest. Without light, the body no longer needed to orient itself constantly. There was no scanning of the room, no visual checking. Attention turned inward naturally. The mind followed the body's lead. Darkness removed comparison. Without sight, there was nothing to measure against. No distance, no division. Everything existed in the same quiet field. In shared spaces, darkness created equality. No one stood out. No one was observed. This absence of visibility softened social awareness. There was no need to perform, no need to explain. The self relaxed. Breathing became slower. Muscles released effort. Posture adjusted naturally. Darkness did not demand stillness. It invited it. Resting inside the dark meant trusting that nothing needed to be seen in order to be known. The body remembered the room. It remembered where it was safe. Hands rested without searching. Feet settled without tension. The dark held everything in place. Sleep did not arrive suddenly. It drifted in slowly, blending with awareness rather than replacing it. Thoughts softened. Images faded. The boundary between waking and sleeping thinned. In this space, rest was not something achieved. It was something allowed. The medieval experience of sleep was not built on control. It was built on surrender. Surrender not to fear, but to familiarity. The dark did not isolate the sleeper. It connected them to the rhythm of night shared by everyone else. Somewhere nearby, others rested too. Even if unseen, they were known. This collective stillness deepened calm. The world did not disappear in darkness. It simply lowered its voice. Sounds became distant. Awareness narrowed gently. There was nothing to follow, nothing to anticipate. The future did not exist inside the dark. Neither did the past. Only the present moment remained. This is why darkness was restful. It stripped experience down to what mattered: warmth, breath, stillness. The body recognized this simplicity and responded with trust. Trust allowed deeper rest. Even dreams emerged gently from this state. They did not interrupt sleep. They floated through it. Darkness provided the space for this movement. It did not demand interpretation. It did not seek meaning. It allowed experience to unfold quietly. In the Middle Ages, resting inside the dark was not a technique. It was a way of being learned over time. Night after night, the body returned to the same conditions, the same absence of light, the same quiet presence. Repetition built confidence. Confidence built rest. Eventually, the dark became familiar enough that it no longer registered as dark. It became background, like water around a swimmer, like air around breath. And in that environment, sleep deepened naturally. There was no need to force the eyes closed, no need to silence the mind. Darkness did the work. It held attention gently until it dissolved. In this way, medieval people did not sleep despite the dark. They slept within it. The night was not something to pass through. It was something to inhabit. And as the hours moved forward, unseen and uncounted, rest continued quietly, securely, without effort. Darkness stayed. Sleep stayed with it. And both passed gently toward morning. In the medieval world, fear existed, but it did not dominate life. It was not loud, it was not constant, and it was not allowed to take control of the night. Fear was understood as a quiet presence, something acknowledged rather than fought. People did not expect life to be free of uncertainty. Illness, loss, hunger, and hardship were familiar companions. But familiarity softened their weight. Fear was not treated as an emergency. It was treated as information. During the day, fear had little space to grow. Work demanded attention. Movement filled time. Community absorbed worry. At night, when activity slowed, fear could surface gently, not as panic, but as awareness. The medieval response to this awareness was not avoidance, it was acceptance. Fear was not something to eliminate before sleep. It was something to place carefully so that rest could continue. People did not lie awake asking whether danger might come. They accepted that uncertainty was part of existence. This acceptance did not increase fear. It reduced it. Fear loses strength when it is not resisted. In shared sleeping spaces, fear rarely stood alone. The presence of others softened it. A quiet breath nearby, a familiar shape in the dark, a sense of belonging. Fear did not isolate the individual. It dissolved into the group. Children learned this early. They sensed fear not through explanation, but through observation. Adults did not dramatize the night. They did not speak of danger unless it was real and immediate. Calm behavior taught calm response. Fear, when it appeared, was met with stillness. There was no racing of the mind, no spiral of imagined outcomes. Fear was allowed to exist without narrative. This lack of narrative was crucial. Stories give fear momentum. Silence limits it. In the medieval night, silence did not amplify fear. It contained it. Fear was not explored. It was not questioned. It was not expanded. It was acknowledged briefly and then left alone. Religious belief played a role here, but not in a dramatic way. Faith was not used to frighten. It was used to release control. The idea that the night was under divine care reduced the burden of vigilance. People did not feel responsible for guarding every moment. They trusted that what was meant to happen would happen, and what was not would pass. This trust did not remove fear. It placed boundaries around it. Fear was not asked to disappear. It was asked to stay quiet. Even those who were not deeply religious absorbed this posture through habit. The culture itself encouraged restraint. Fear was not performed. It was not shared loudly. It was not rewarded with attention. In this environment, fear remained small. Modern fear often grows because it is isolated. It has room to echo. Medieval fear was communal. It was absorbed by routine. The rhythm of the day continued regardless of individual worry. This continuity grounded the mind. At night, fear had even less space to grow. Darkness did not magnify it. Familiarity reduced it. Fear was recognized as something that belonged to life, not something that defined it. There was also an understanding that fear did not always require action. Not every feeling demanded response. This allowed the body to remain calm even when awareness sharpened briefly. A sound, a thought, a moment of uncertainty. Each passed without escalation. Fear was treated as temporary. This relationship with fear supported sleep. Sleep did not require fearlessness. It required trust. Trust that fear could exist without controlling the night. Trust that rest could continue even in uncertainty. The medieval night was not fearless. It was steady. Fear did not disappear at sunset. It settled into the background. Like other sounds of the night, fear became something known rather than something feared. In this way, fear lost its sharp edges. It became a quiet presence, noticeable but not disruptive. The body did not tense against it. The mind did not chase it. Fear was allowed to be incomplete, and because it was incomplete, it could not take over. As sleep approached, fear softened further. It lost definition. The mind moved away from threat and toward familiarity, warmth, breath, stillness. Fear had no place among these. In the medieval understanding, fear was not an enemy to defeat before rest. It was simply another part of the human experience, one that did not need to be carried into sleep. So fear remained at the edge of awareness, quiet, contained, unembellished. And with fear held gently but firmly in place, the night continued. Sleep arrived, not because fear was gone, but because it no longer mattered. In the medieval world, faith was woven into daily life so naturally that it rarely needed explanation. It did not announce itself loudly. It did not interrupt routine. And at night, it did not demand attention. Faith softened. As evening arrived, prayer did not take the form of long sermons or dramatic gestures. It became simple, short, familiar. Night prayers were not meant to impress or persuade. They were meant to settle the mind. People did not pray to change the night. They prayed to rest within it. A few quiet words spoken before sleep were enough, sometimes only a phrase, sometimes only a gesture. Prayer was not always vocal. Often it lived in memory. Words learned in childhood returned automatically at night, not as thoughts, but as habits. These habits created continuity. The same prayer spoken each evening did not need to be reconsidered. It did not invite analysis. It marked the transition from activity to rest. In this way, prayer functioned as a boundary. It signaled to the body that effort could end. Faith offered a structure for uncertainty, not answers, but containment. People did not expect prayer to eliminate fear. They expected it to hold fear quietly in place. A prayer before sleep did not ask for guarantees. It asked for peace. Often, it asked simply for protection through the night, not from specific dangers, but from worry itself. Faith did not need to name every threat. It trusted that naming was unnecessary. This trust reduced mental activity. Once prayer was spoken, the night no longer needed to be managed. Responsibility shifted outward. The burden of vigilance lifted. This shift was deeply calming. Modern minds often remain active at night because they feel responsible for every outcome. Medieval faith redistributed that responsibility. What could not be controlled was given away. Prayer allowed the mind to release control without conflict. This release was not dramatic. It was practiced quietly, night after night. Faith also shaped how people understood sleep itself. Sleep was not seen as vulnerability alone. It was seen as trust. To fall asleep was to place oneself briefly outside of awareness. Faith made this act acceptable. It reassured the sleeper that the world would continue without their attention. God was believed to remain present even when the human mind rested. This belief allowed deeper sleep. People did not feel abandoned by the night. They felt accompanied. Even those who struggled with fear found comfort in repetition. A familiar prayer did not need belief in every moment. It worked through rhythm. Repetition calmed the nervous system long before the mind fully understood why. This is one reason night prayers remained short and unchanged. They were not meant to engage thought. They were meant to bypass it. A few words, a sign of the cross, a pause. That was enough. Faith also extended beyond formal prayer. Objects carried meaning. A cross near the bed, an icon on the wall, a small image remembered rather than seen. These symbols did not function as charms. They functioned as reminders. They reminded the sleeper that the night was not empty. This sense of presence reduced loneliness. Loneliness often amplifies fear. Faith softened it. The medieval understanding of faith was relational rather than argumentative. People did not debate belief at night. They rested within it. Night was not the time for questioning doctrine. It was the time for quiet acceptance. Faith did not demand clarity. It offered rest. This approach allowed belief to remain gentle. Fear was not confronted with force. It was overshadowed by familiarity. faith was not something to focus on intensely. It was something to lean against. This leaning required little effort. It was learned early. Children grew up watching adults pray calmly before sleep. There was no urgency, no anxiety. The act itself taught calm. Over time, faith became associated with safety rather than obligation. This association mattered deeply. Sleep requires safety, not physical safety alone, but emotional safety. Faith provided this emotional shelter. It did not promise that nothing would happen. It promised that whatever happened would be held within a larger order. This promise did not remove uncertainty. It made uncertainty tolerable. Prayer also created closure. The day ended with words that did not need response. Concerns were not carried forward. Once prayer was spoken, the mind was free to let go. Sleep followed naturally. In this way, prayer was less about belief and more about rhythm. It aligned the mind with the night. It told the body that the work of the day was complete. Nothing more was required. Faith did not increase vigilance. It reduced it. And because it reduced vigilance, sleep deepened. People did not fall asleep clinging to fear or responsibility. They fell asleep having placed those things elsewhere. This placement was not abstract. It was felt. The chest softened. The breath slowed. The mind quieted. Faith did not keep people awake. It allowed them to rest. In the medieval night, prayer did not compete with sleep. It prepared the ground for it. Words faded. Gestures ended. Silence returned. And within that silence, faith remained. Not as thought, not as effort, but as quiet presence. A presence that asked nothing more. And because nothing more was asked, sleep arrived. In the medieval world, protection was rarely loud or dramatic. It did not rely on constant vigilance or force. Instead, it lived quietly in symbols, gestures, and repeated habits. Protection was something people recognized, not something they actively questioned. Small objects carried meaning, not because they promised control, but because they represented continuity. A cross near the bed, an icon placed where it could be seen in the morning and remembered at night. A simple marking near a doorway. These were not charms meant to manipulate the unseen. They were reminders of order. Symbols told the mind that the space was known, that it had been used before, that others had rested here safely. This familiarity mattered deeply. At night, when uncertainty naturally increases, the mind looks for reassurance. Symbols provided this reassurance without demanding attention. They did not need explanation. Their meaning was absorbed through repetition. Seeing the same symbol night after night created emotional stability. Protection, in this sense, was not about preventing danger. It was about reducing anxiety. People did not expect symbols to stop every harm. They expected them to signal belonging within a larger pattern. Rituals worked in a similar way. Before sleep, certain actions were repeated almost without thought. A brief pause at the threshold, a quiet word spoken, a gesture made automatically. These actions did not change the night. They changed the mind's relationship to it. Rituals marked transition. They told the body that one state had ended and another was beginning. This transition mattered more than the content of the ritual itself. By repeating the same small actions each night, people created predictability. Predictability calms the nervous system. The medieval night was not random. It followed recognizable steps. Rituals gave structure to the unknown. Doors and thresholds held special meaning. Crossing into the sleeping space was not rushed. A threshold marked separation between the outer world and the inner one. This separation was symbolic rather than physical. It did not require locks or barriers. It required acknowledgement. By pausing, even briefly, the mind shifted from alertness to rest. Beds themselves became sites of quiet ritual, not formal ceremonies, but habits formed through repetition. Arranging blankets, settling clothing, positioning objects nearby. These acts were not rushed. They unfolded slowly, guiding the body toward stillness. Protective symbols were often simple and personal. They did not need to be elaborate. A familiar object from childhood. A small item passed down within a family. Something remembered rather than seen. These items carried emotional weight rather than supernatural promise. They reminded the sleeper of continuity across time. Others had rested before. Others would rest again. This awareness softened fear. Rituals also extended to sound. A familiar prayer, a repeated phrase, a quiet blessing. These sounds did not demand belief in every moment. They worked through rhythm. The mind responded to repetition more than meaning. This repetition was soothing. Symbols and rituals did not eliminate fear. They gave it boundaries. Fear was allowed to exist, but it was not allowed to wander freely. The mind was gently directed toward familiarity instead. Over time, this redirection became automatic. The body learned to associate certain actions and symbols with rest. This association reduced effort. Sleep arrived more easily when the same cues were present. Modern sleep science recognizes this pattern, but medieval people lived it instinctively. They did not analyze rituals. They trusted them. Trust reduced cognitive load. The night did not require problem solving. Once rituals were complete, responsibility felt lighter. Protection had been acknowledged. Nothing more needed to be done. There was also a communal aspect to these symbols. Shared households often used the same signs and habits. This created a collective sense of safety. Everyone recognized the same cues. This shared understanding reinforced calm. No one needed to explain why a symbol was there. Its presence was enough. Symbols did not compete for attention. They sat quietly within the environment. This quiet presence was key. Protection did not announce itself. It waited patiently. Even when people traveled, they carried small rituals with them, a remembered gesture, a whispered phrase. These portable habits provided continuity in unfamiliar spaces. Sleep followed familiarity, even away from home. Rituals did not promise certainty. They promised steadiness. In a world where much was unpredictable, steadiness mattered more than control. Protective symbols reminded people that they were not starting each night from nothing. The night had been met before. It would be met again. This perspective reduced urgency. Urgency is the enemy of sleep. Rituals removed urgency by creating closure. Once a symbol was acknowledged, once a gesture was made, the mind could rest. Nothing was left unfinished. This sense of completion mattered deeply. Even when fear appeared, it encountered structure rather than emptiness. Structure limited imagination. Imagination thrives in undefined space. Symbols defined space quietly. They told the mind where it was, and knowing where one is allows rest. In the medieval night, protection was not dramatic. It was subtle. It was familiar. It was repeated. And because it was repeated, it worked. Not by changing the world, but by calming the one who slept within it. Rituals did not ask the night to behave differently. They asked the sleeper to trust. Trust grew through habit. Habit became comfort. Comfort allowed sleep. In this way, protective symbols and small rituals shaped the medieval experience of rest. They did not guard the night with force. They softened it with familiarity. And within that softened space, sleep continued quietly, held not by fear, but by recognition. In the medieval world, trust was not abstract. It was practiced. People did not speak often about trust as an idea. They lived it quietly, night after night, through repetition and acceptance. To sleep was to trust. Trust that the world would continue without constant supervision. Trust that the night did not require watching. Trust that what could not be controlled did not need to be. Faith and trust were closely linked, but not identical. Faith offered a framework. Trust was the daily application of that framework. At night, this distinction became clear. People did not lie awake asking whether God would protect them. Protection was assumed. The act of lying down itself was an expression of trust. In a world without constant light, without locks as we know them, without surveillance, sleep required surrender. This surrender was not dramatic. It was ordinary. Trust was not something summoned through effort. It emerged from habit. Day after day, people saw that the night passed. Morning returned. Life continued. This repetition created confidence. Trust did not eliminate risk. It changed the relationship to it. People understood that danger existed, but they did not give it permanent attention. Attention was saved for what could be influenced. The rest was released. This release mattered deeply at night. Modern anxiety often comes from feeling responsible for every outcome. The medieval worldview distributed responsibility differently. What belonged to human action was done during the day. What belonged to the larger order was left to God or to the world itself. Night marked this boundary. When darkness arrived, effort ended. Trust stepped in where effort stopped. People did not try to solve the night. they entered it. Trusting God did not mean expecting intervention at every moment. It meant accepting limits. Limits reduced mental strain. The mind did not need to imagine every possible future. It returned to the present. Trust also shaped how people interpreted events. A quiet night was not celebrated. A restless night was not blamed. Both were part of the same unfolding world. This neutral interpretation protected emotional balance. Nothing had to mean more than it was. Faith offered reassurance not through promises, but through perspective. The world was larger than individual worry. This perspective softened attachment to outcomes. Sleep deepened when outcomes were no longer rehearsed. Trust extended beyond religious belief. It included trust in routine, trust in community, trust in the predictability of nature. The moon would rise, the stars would follow their paths, the seasons would continue. This predictability allowed the body to relax. People trusted the world because they had lived inside its rhythms for their entire lives. Nature was not distant. It was intimate. Trust grew from familiarity. Even uncertainty had boundaries. Illness might come, but not every night. Loss might occur, but not without warning. The night was not a time for sudden transformation. It was a time for continuation. This understanding mattered. Trust allowed the mind to stop scanning for change. It allowed awareness to soften. In this softened state, sleep arrived naturally. Trust also reduced self-importance. People did not feel required to manage everything. The night belonged to something larger. This release of control was deeply restful. To trust God was to trust that the world did not depend entirely on one's own vigilance. This belief did not weaken responsibility during the day. It strengthened rest at night. People worked when work was needed. They rested when rest was needed. The two states did not overlap. Modern minds often carry daytime concerns into the night. Medieval minds practiced separation. Trust marked the boundary. Trust also allowed people to sleep without constant checking. Doors were closed, but not obsessively. Fires were banked, not watched endlessly. Once preparations were complete, attention ended. Nothing more was required. This sense of completion mattered. Completion allows rest. Incomplete tasks keep the mind alert. Trust completed the day. Even fear, when it appeared, was placed within this trust. Fear was not dismissed. It was contextualized. It existed within a larger order that continued regardless. This context reduced intensity. Fear could be felt without becoming dominant. Trust did not require certainty. It required acceptance of uncertainty. This acceptance reduced resistance. Resistance is exhausting. Trust conserved energy. Sleep thrives where energy is conserved. The medieval night was not guarded by constant awareness. It was held by trust. Trust that breath would continue. Trust that warmth would remain. Trust that the world would not collapse in darkness. These trusts were not articulated. They were embodied. The body learned them through repetition. Night after night, sleep followed trust. and trust grew stronger. In this way, trusting God and trusting the world were not separate acts. They were the same posture expressed differently, one through belief, the other through experience. Both led to the same outcome: rest. In the medieval world, sleep was not earned through exhaustion alone. It was permitted through trust. Trust that nothing more needed to be done. Trust that the night would hold what the day could not. And with that trust, the body released effort. The mind released vigilance. And sleep arrived quietly, without force, without fear, without demand. In the medieval world, sleep did not coexist with constant alertness. The two were understood as separate states. To sleep was not to watch. To rest was not to guard. This distinction was learned early and practiced daily. People did not expect themselves to remain vigilant through the night. Vigilance belonged to daylight. It belonged to work, travel, and decision. Night belonged to release. This release was not careless. It was deliberate. Before sleep, preparations were made. Doors were closed. Fires were banked. Animals were settled. Once these tasks were complete, attention ended. Nothing more was added. This sense of completion mattered deeply. Completion allowed the body to relax. The medieval mind did not rehearse dangers endlessly. It trusted preparation. Once preparation was done, worry was unnecessary. This trust reduced mental noise. Modern anxiety often persists because tasks feel unfinished. The medieval routine created clear endings. Endings invite rest. After preparation, vigilance stepped aside. The body did not remain in a state of readiness. It softened. Muscles released tension. Breath slowed. The mind followed the body's lead. Constant vigilance is exhausting. It demands energy without resolution. The medieval way avoided this trap. People did not believe that watching longer would improve safety. They believed that watching appropriately and then stopping was wiser. This belief protected sleep. Night was not treated as a time for monitoring. It was a time for withdrawal. Withdrawal was not abandonment. It was trust in limits. Humans could not see in the dark. They could not hear everything. They could not prevent every outcome. Accepting these limits reduced strain. Sleep requires surrender to limitation. The medieval night encouraged this surrender. There was no illusion of control created by light or technology. Awareness naturally diminished. This natural diminishing was not resisted. Without constant stimulation, the nervous system downshifted. The body entered rest mode without effort. Even when brief awakenings occurred, they did not reset vigilance. Someone might stir. Listen briefly, and return to rest. Awakenings did not lead to alertness. They led back to stillness. This ability to return to rest quickly is central to deep sleep. It was learned through repetition. Night after night, people experienced that nothing required their attention. This experience trained the body to let go. The absence of constant vigilance also shaped emotional resilience. Fear did not linger because it was not fed. Attention did not amplify worry. Thoughts did not spiral. The night was not a space for problem solving. Problems belonged to daylight. This separation protected mental health. Modern life often blurs this boundary. Concerns follow us into bed. The medieval world maintained a clearer division. Once the day ended, effort ended. This clarity mattered. Sleep did not require exhaustion. It required permission. Permission came from structure. Structure told the body when it was safe to stop. Sleeping without vigilance also depended on community. People did not sleep alone in responsibility. If something truly required attention, someone else would notice. This shared awareness reduced individual burden. No one felt solely responsible for the night. Responsibility was distributed. Distributed responsibility reduces anxiety. The medieval night was not guarded by one mind. It was held by many. This collective holding allowed individual release. Even in solitude, this pattern persisted. People trusted that the world itself carried some responsibility. Nature moved predictably. Morning returned reliably. Trust replaced watchfulness. Watchfulness is rooted in fear of surprise. Trust is rooted in experience of continuity. The medieval experience offered continuity. Surprises were rare. Most nights were the same. This sameness was not boring. It was calming. The body thrives on predictability. Predictability signals safety. Safety allows sleep. Without constant vigilance, sleep deepened naturally. The body entered longer cycles of rest. Dreams unfolded without interruption. Awareness dimmed gradually. There was no abrupt loss of control. Letting go happened step by step. The mind did not fight wakefulness. It allowed it to dissolve. This is why medieval sleep, though interrupted at times, was often deep. Depth does not require duration. It requires surrender. Surrender cannot coexist with vigilance. The medieval night taught surrender. Even fear, when present, was not allowed to demand constant attention. Fear was acknowledged, then set aside. The body returned to rest. This practice prevented fear from becoming chronic. Chronic fear thrives on vigilance. By removing vigilance, fear lost its fuel. The night became a place of recovery rather than defense. Recovery restored energy for the next day. This cycle sustained life. Sleeping without constant vigilance did not make people careless. It made them balanced. They worked when work was needed. They rested when rest was needed. Neither state invaded the other. This balance supported health. Sleep was not fragile. It was resilient. It did not shatter at the first disturbance. It resumed easily. This resilience came from trust. Trust in preparation. Trust in routine. Trust in the world's ability to continue without supervision. In the medieval world, sleep was not protected by alarms or surveillance. It was protected by letting go. Letting go of responsibility. Letting go of control. Letting go of constant awareness. This letting go was not weakness. It was wisdom. The night did not require watchers. It required resters, and those who rested without vigilance allowed the night to do its work. The body healed, the mind quieted. Morning arrived. In this way, medieval people slept not because danger was absent, but because vigilance was no longer needed. They trusted that the night would pass. And it did. In the medieval world, sleep did not mark the end of experience. It marked a transition. When the body rested, the mind did not disappear. It moved quietly into another state, one that was not fully awake and not fully unconscious. This space was known. It was familiar. It was where dreams lived. Dreams were not treated as distractions. They were not dismissed as meaningless noise. They were accepted as part of the night's natural order. People did not try to control what appeared in dreams. They allowed dreams to arrive as they were. This acceptance mattered. Dreams were understood as gentle continuations of waking life, not separate worlds, but softened reflections. Images drifted through sleep the way sounds drifted through the night. They did not demand attention. They invited observation. The medieval understanding of dreams was calm and measured. Not every dream carried meaning. Not every image required interpretation. This restraint protected rest. Dreams were not analyzed immediately upon waking. They were remembered loosely, allowed to fade if they wished. Only dreams that repeated or arrived with unusual clarity were considered worth holding on to. Even then, interpretation was slow. Dreams were not decoded urgently. They were placed gently alongside daily experience. This approach prevented mental agitation. Modern minds often awaken from dreams searching for explanation. Medieval minds trusted that meaning, if present, would reveal itself without force. Dreams were not puzzles to be solved before morning. They were companions of the night. There was also a spiritual dimension to dreaming, but it was not sensational. Dreams were sometimes understood as messages, but messages did not require immediate action. They required patience. A dream could be discussed quietly later, perhaps with a trusted person, perhaps not at all. Many dreams were simply accepted as part of rest. This acceptance reduced anxiety around sleep. Fear of disturbing dreams did not keep people awake. They trusted that dreams would not harm them. Even unsettling dreams were approached calmly. A troubling image was not taken as a sign of doom. It was understood as a reflection of the mind's movement. Nightmares were acknowledged, but not dramatized. They were believed to pass. The medieval night did not amplify dreams into threats. It contained them. If a dream caused discomfort, prayer or routine followed. The dream was placed within a larger structure. It did not stand alone. This prevented lingering fear. Dreams also carried familiarity. People dreamed of what they knew: fields, homes, faces, animals. The dream world did not overwhelm the waking one. It echoed it softly. This familiarity reduced shock. Dreams felt continuous rather than disruptive. Because sleep was shared, dreams were not always private. Someone might mention a dream casually in the morning, not for analysis, but for acknowledgement. Dreams were social in this way. They were not secrets that needed decoding. They were experiences that passed through. This openness prevented fixation. The medieval understanding of dreams emphasized balance. Too much attention disturbed rest. Too little attention ignored potential insight. The middle path was preferred. Dreams were allowed space, but not dominance. This balance protected sleep over the long term. There was also an understanding that dreams changed with the seasons. Long winter nights brought deeper, slower dreams. Short summer nights brought lighter ones. These changes were accepted. No single dream pattern was expected. Sleep adapted to light, temperature, and rhythm. Dreams followed. The body trusted this process. In this world, the mind did not fear losing control in sleep. Dreaming was not seen as dangerous. It was simply another way the mind rested. Rest did not mean absence of thought. It meant absence of effort. Dreams required no effort. They arose and faded naturally. This made them compatible with deep rest. Even when dreams carried emotion, the emotion was contained. It did not spill into waking life unless invited. Morning arrived gently. Dreams did not cling. They loosened with the light. This gentle release mattered. Sleep did not end abruptly. It softened into wakefulness. Dreams dissolved without resistance. The medieval night allowed the mind to move freely without fear of consequence. This freedom deepened rest. Dreams were not expected to explain life. They were expected to accompany it. In this way, dreams did not disturb sleep. They enriched it quietly. They offered texture to the night without demanding clarity. When sleep deepened further, dreams thinned. Awareness narrowed. The mind moved beyond imagery into stillness. Even this state was not feared. It was understood as the deepest form of rest, a place where the mind finally let go of form. In the medieval understanding, sleep was layered. Light rest, dreaming, deep stillness. Each layer belonged. None was superior, none was resisted. This acceptance allowed sleep to unfold fully. Dreams did not interrupt the night. They completed it. They carried the mind gently across hours without effort. And when the body finally rested beyond dreaming, when even images faded, the night held the sleeper completely. No meaning was required. No message needed interpretation. The mind rested simply because it could. In the medieval world, dreams were not doors to anxiety. They were quiet passages, and within those passages, sleep continued, calm, unforced, and whole. In the medieval world, sleep and death were not distant ideas. They were spoken of quietly, not as threats, but as part of the same natural rhythm. Sleep was often called a small death, not because it ended life, but because it resembled letting go. Each night, the body surrendered consciousness. Each morning, it returned. This cycle was familiar. Because death was present in daily life, it was not hidden from thought. But neither was it exaggerated. it was acknowledged. Like sleep, death was understood as a transition rather than an interruption. People did not believe that consciousness vanished completely at night. They believed it rested elsewhere. This belief softened fear. Sleep became practice. Practice in letting go of control. Practice in trusting the unknown. Practice in surrendering effort. The mind learned, night after night, that releasing awareness was not dangerous. This lesson mattered. Fear of death often grows from fear of losing control. Sleep gently challenged that fear every evening. Each night, people lay down knowing they would not be aware for hours. They did this without panic. Habit replaced fear. The medieval understanding did not separate body and soul harshly. Sleep was seen as a state where the soul wandered gently, not lost, not endangered. This imagery offered comfort. If the soul could leave and return safely each night, then death did not feel like a violent break. It felt like a deeper version of something already known. This familiarity reduced existential anxiety. Death was not imagined as sudden annihilation. It was imagined as continuation under different conditions. Sleep modeled this continuation. There was also a practical acceptance of mortality. Life was fragile. People knew this. But knowing did not paralyze them. Instead, it shaped perspective. Because life could end, rest mattered. Because time was finite, effort had limits. Sleep honored those limits. Night was not a place to resist the inevitable. It was a place to accept the body's needs. Acceptance did not mean resignation. It meant alignment. People aligned themselves with the rhythm of existence rather than fighting it. This alignment reduced struggle. The medieval night did not invite philosophical debate about death. It invited calm familiarity. Children grew up understanding that life ended, but also that endings were not chaotic. Death happened within community, within ritual, within meaning. This framework reduced fear. Sleep inherited this framework. Lying down was not rehearsing death anxiously. It was participating in a familiar pattern. The body trusted the pattern. Trust allowed relaxation. Fear requires resistance. Acceptance dissolves it. Sleep was acceptance practiced daily. Even grief followed this understanding. When someone died, the night did not become unbearable. It became quieter. Rest continued. Life adapted. This adaptability was crucial. Death did not freeze the living in fear. It reminded them of continuity. Sleep reinforced this continuity nightly. There was also a sense of humility tied to this acceptance. Humans were not expected to control life or death. They were expected to live within limits. Sleep honored those limits. At night, effort ended. Control ended. Awareness faded. Nothing more was asked. This ending was gentle. Gentleness mattered. The medieval approach did not romanticize death, but it did not terrorize it either. Death was not invited, but it was not chased away in panic. It waited where it belonged. Sleep showed that waiting was possible. The body learned that absence of awareness did not mean absence of existence. This lesson softened fear of nothingness. Sleep became reassurance. Each morning confirmed it. Awareness returned. Life continued. This repetition trained the mind to accept uncertainty without distress. Acceptance did not remove sadness. It removed panic. Sadness could be held. Panic dissolved. This distinction mattered deeply. Sleep supported emotional balance by offering regular rehearsal of letting go. The medieval night did not demand courage. It taught it quietly. By sleeping, people practiced trust in continuity. By waking, they confirmed it. This cycle shaped resilience. Death was not an interruption to be imagined constantly. It was an endpoint that did not define every moment before it. Life remained life. Sleep remained sleep. Both were allowed to exist without overwhelming the other. As night deepened, thoughts of death softened. They did not sharpen. They settled into the background of awareness like distant stars. Present, but not intrusive. The mind rested within this spaciousness. There was no urgency to resolve mortality. It would resolve itself in its own time. Until then, rest was enough. The medieval understanding did not seek to defeat death intellectually. It sought to live peacefully alongside its possibility. Sleep made this coexistence possible. Each night, people stepped briefly into the unknown and returned safely. This familiarity reduced fear. In the end, sleep was not a rehearsal for death in a frightening sense. It was a reassurance that letting go was survivable, that awareness could fade and return, that trust was rewarded, and because of this, people slept. Not because death was absent, but because it no longer needed attention. The night held both life and its limits quietly, and within that quiet, sleep arrived, deep, unforced, and complete. The night does not ask anything of you now. There is nothing left to follow, nothing left to understand, nothing left to hold in mind. The world is already doing what it needs to do. Breath moves on its own. The body rests where it is. Time passes without being counted. You do not need to stay with the words. You do not need to remember anything. You can let the sound of the voice become part of the background, like the distant night sounds you have already learned to trust. Nothing here requires effort. The day has already ended. Everything that could be done has been done. Now there is only night. The night does not rush. It does not arrive suddenly. It simply remains. You are not moving through it. You are resting inside it. Thoughts may appear for a moment, then drift away on their own. You do not need to follow them. They know where to go. The body understands this moment well. It has rested like this before. It knows how to soften. It knows how to let go. Nothing needs to be controlled. Awareness can narrow gently without disappearing all at once. There is no edge to cross, no point where sleep suddenly begins. Rest arrives gradually, like darkness settling evenly across the land. Breathing slows, muscles release, the space behind the eyes grows quiet. You may notice the body becoming heavier or lighter. Both are signs of rest. You may hear sounds around you, or you may not. Either way is fine. Sound no longer asks for attention. Silence no longer feels empty. The night holds everything equally. There is no need to stay awake for what comes next. Nothing important will be missed. Morning will arrive whether you watch for it or not. The world continues quietly in your absence. This has always been true. Sleep does not require permission. It does not require intention. It arrives when the body is ready, and the body is ready now. You do not need to listen closely. You do not need to stay present. You can drift. You can rest. You can let the night carry you. The voice will remain calm, steady, unchanging. It will not ask you to respond. It will not ask you to stay. You are free to leave awareness behind. Nothing here depends on you. The night continues. Breath continues. Time continues. And you can rest inside that continuation without effort, without thought, without concern. Sleep does not need to be reached. It is already here. If you are still awake, there is no problem. Rest is already happening. If you are no longer listening, everything is exactly as it should be. The night is patient. It does not hurry you. It does not wait for you either. It simply remains. And within it, sleep unfolds naturally, quietly, completely.